There we go. We are recording. Matt, you will have to be the whole next slide thing for me. But right, let's make a start then. So yeah, hey everybody, and welcome to the Welsh Azure user group meetup on the 19th of July. Yeah, a little bit unusual. As you can see, the sun's behind me. I'm sat in the car at a service station. But thanks everybody that's joined so far. Hopefully we'll get a few more through the doors now over the next 5 minutes. So as usual, we'll just jump into a quick bit of intro and housekeeping. Matt, if you you're going to have to do two jobs tonight, Matt. It's man the slides and man the lobby. Yeah, first up, as per usual, obviously, Welsh Show User Group isn't run by just myself and Matt. There's a team of us behind the scenes pulling things together. As always, I say this every month, but it is a community user group, so we're here to kind of service the community and those that join in and want to learn and understand Azure technologies in a bit more of a deeper fashion. So please do reach out to any one of us. There's our details on the screen there. If you've got ideas, thoughts you want to speak, reach out to any one of us and we can hook you up and be great to have you along and join in at any time. Next slide, please, Matt. Yeah, so tonight again, as per usual, we've got another group of fantastic sessions for you. First up, we'll have Darren and Pete from Nutanix joining us in the first session in about 5-10 minutes time to talk about Nutanix on Azure. So this is, again, I say this on every one of these new talks, but genuinely they're really exciting to kind of understand a bit more of the deeper fashion, especially if you come from that infra world and hyper-converged infrastructure and you're looking at Nutanix or you're running Nutanix. What does it mean to run Nutanix on Azure? So Darren's going to be talking us through that and, get your questions ready. If you do have any questions on it, I'm sure be able to kind of ask them in the chat. And there's Thomas just joined us. Hey, Thomas, thanks for joining. And then, next up then we've got Dean Ellerby. He's well known in the community for doing fantastic talks, and I think he's centering around security at the moment. So he's joining us a little bit later to talk all around vendor IoT. So stay tuned for that session at about, I'd say, 7:15ish, something like that. So I'm sure he'll be dialing in fairly soon anyway. Next slide, please, Matt. And then, so there, from a timings point of view, there's some timings. After Dean's talk, as per usual, we will have the infamous probably quiz that we do now with we'll see how many people we get joining, but we'll work out what we're going to do for prizes. But we will have actual prizes. Everybody's more than welcome to join, as per usual. Nice bit of fun at the end of the session. So get your mobile phones or web browsers ready for that. We'll do that, like I say, immediately following Dean's session. Bit of housekeeping. So first thing first, obviously should go without saying, but everybody please do be courteous to each other. We're all here to learn, enjoy, share information, and make sure that if we do have those silly questions, then get a chance to ask it, because there are no silly questions. This is absolutely the platform to ask them. Be inquisitive, ask away. The speakers are more than happy to kind of help understanding. But like I say, don't feel that any question you have isn't warranted. Put it in the chat or come off mute if the speaker invites you to, and ask away. Like I say, we'll have the chat functionality ready, so please do enter any questions. Join in the chat. It's a community feel at the moment, albeit virtually still, but about participation and getting involved. So please do that. Feedback's always vitally important to us. As we do every month, we leave the QR code at the end of the session. If you do get a chance, a couple of minutes to spare, please do fill that feedback form in to us. It helps kind of set the scene for the up and coming sessions. And as we're always thinking about going back to doing some in-person events. But I think me and Matt constantly saying, right, we'll do it next month, but we will get there at some point very soon. But like I said, we got too many fantastic guest speakers to get through basically before that anyway. So I've mentioned the quiz already, but look, most importantly, be interactive, join the chat, enjoy the sessions, and have a little bit of fun as we're doing it. So on that note, just want a quick shout out from the sponsors of these events. As much as I'm kind of doing this from the back of the car, maybe it's the fact that myself, Matt, and the rest of the team have done 3 years of these sessions now. So I think we all know how to pull these events together virtually. they wouldn't be possible without the backing of some kind of great folks at Servant. Des and the team at Servant have supported us and other user groups around the UK for the last, well, from the Welsh Azure, absolutely for the last 3 years, and I know he's been supporting the other user groups longer than that as well. So big shout out to Servant. Go and look them up. They're an Azure MSP. Like I say, Des and the team have been a huge support. So big shout out to Servant and thank you for the support of the group. And yeah, a couple of months ago, we got new, for those that remember, we were supported by Admiral, which unfortunately we couldn't get renewed, but, great to have Credit Safe, who've got offices based down in Cardiff, South Wales as well. So they come on board now to support the group and help us with any bits and pieces, hopefully some in-person events when we get there in the next few months, Matt? We'll see how we get on. But yeah, so like I say, thanks to Servant. Sorry, Matt, go on.
Fingers crossed.
Yeah, no, absolutely fingers crossed. I think we just got to get to that point where we can actually get a bit of time to do it, But we will. I'm sure we will. But I think there's another slide there, Matt, about Credit Safe, if you want to quickly flash that one up on the screen. But yeah, like I say, it's always nice having local Welsh businesses supporting, what is the Welsh Azure user group, because as much as it's about knowledge sharing information, it's about networking and trying to understand what businesses are doing and hopefully form that collective of knowledge sharing capability between us all. So huge shout out to Credit Safe as well, and thank you for supporting the user groups. And on that note, I think we might be done. Yeah. So so first up, then I'd like to hand you to Darren. Darren, if you're there, waiting in the wings, I'll hand the floor over to you. Share away. And we're going to have a look at Nutanix on Azure. So thanks for joining us, Darren. Always a pleasure.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks for the chance to present. Right. So I'm sort of all set up here, really. What I've got for you today is a mixture of slides, chat, demo. Kind of, we can take a look at the console. Let me just arrange a few screens here. But really what I want to do is give you a flavour of what Nutanix is and then what we're doing with Nutanix in Azure, and why that, might be of interest to you, your companies, or kind of, from a sort of professional point of view, kind of getting an understanding of what are the emerging trends in the market overall. So as I said, I'll start with a few slides. I don't really want to be in the slides all the time. And really, it would be great, there's a few of us, if you've got questions, pop them in the chat, or just feel free to come off mute and sort of, butt in. Let's keep this interactive. And I'd like you to go away with, something of value today, understanding Nutanix. So if there's a point that, you want me to cover, or if you've got a question or a challenge, I'm all up for that, really. Don't be frightened to kind of ask anything. So a little bit about me, really. I'm Darren. I'm a system engineer, kind of a product specialist now in Nutanix. And I've been in Nutanix 5 years, but I first deployed it nearly 10 years ago now, when it is really in its early stages of its formation. So Nutanix has been around for, probably, I think, kind of 2009. I think it was, in initial startup stealth mode in the early kind of tweenies, and then it, really went sort of main stage as a startup, kind of 2012, 2013. And that's when I first deployed it for a VDI infrastructure deployment. And it was, having done it VDI for kind of a number of years previously, it was sort of the technology that, really opened my eye to the capabilities of this, local storage that's become shared storage and kind of shared out in a way that was quite special and was unlike anything else we'd seen in the enterprise. And so prior to that, really, I'd kind of, till now, I've worked for around three decades in infrastructure services across, consulting, across infrastructure services, working for large organisations. This is my first job for a vendor, and it really, pins down to that kind of initial contact that I had with it back in 2013. And funnily enough, that VDI deployment is still going, and they're sweating some of the assets that have been in there since 2013. Long story there, but that's testament to the platform overall. So I think just to start off with then, really, I mean, I'm not sure if people have heard of Nutanix and really understand, what we are and kind of. So I'm just going to a couple of slides to really look at what Nutanix is and where we came from, because I think that's an interesting story in itself. Now, it was around, the 2010 mark that Nutanix pioneered the HCI revolution in the data center. And so what our founders came from the project that implemented Google File System, and they took that approach of taking, commodity servers, software-based solutions, joining them all together in some distributed system, and deploying out this kind of platform that was being done by the hyperscalers at the time. Google, Yahoo weren't doing that. Yahoo were taking a slightly different approach. And when you look at Yahoo, who were massive, and Google with this, kind of upstart, you could see the tables turn around that. And part of that story, obviously, there's, kind of many aspects to that, but part of that was the way that they had this distributed system that could scale without the challenges that you perhaps get with traditional data center environments. And I mean, traditional data center environments, we call them 3-tier, servers, storage networks, and storage arrays. They've been the cornerstone of industry, the IT industry for decades, right? And they're rock solid. They run pretty much, kind of most of the world, and still do now. But they don't come without, their challenges, really. They can add certain complexities, really, around the buy process, large upfront investment. You have to over provision that, choose what you need for the next 5 years. You might already have a SAN from a different vendor, and then that can make deploying a complex. MPIO, for example, kind of the connectivity. You've got lots of things to think about, channel queue depths, channels, etc., carving up LUNs, and this particular workload need that kind of array. And it's all good, it's all doable, and we have specialists to do all of that, but it adds complexity. So an upgrade of a SAN is a major project. Really, what we look to do, with Nutanix, and certainly what HCI is doing with the infrastructure is basically combine all of that, combine the network, the security, the virtualization, the servers, the storage, the networking into commodity x86 servers that can run both VMs and containers, but then give you flexibility to choose things like the hypervisor, things like the hardware, and also the cloud provider when we come on to that. And we aim to do that with, a simplicity in the way that we use or have Nutanix that, we feel like is unrivaled in the industry. We're an IT company, we have the same challenges that everyone else has, but what we try and do is build a lot of that logic into either our code or our processes. So you as a customer, as a consumer of this technology, aren't having to sort of go through, kind of like steps to make, let's go back to that analogy with the SAN, I want to upgrade my, kind of like my OS or my hypervisor. Does this fiber channel card support it? Will it need this firmware? Then, and they're kind of trying to work all of that out. We have all of that built into our platform automatically, even down to the firmware level. So, this x86 solution makes it kind of possible to take x86 servers, or this software solution makes it possible to take x86 servers, combine them in a cluster, and deliver out enterprise scalability for both containers, for virtual machines. And what we do is we aim to put the data and the applications local to each other. So you've got the minimal I/O path with resilience, that's possible to have. Now, obviously, some writes need to go over to remote nodes, but we can, we strive to have the data local to those machines. So we're talking local bus access for the vast majority of reads, and certainly when we write, half those writes at least are local to that node. So we cut down out a lot of that kind of I/O or latency that you would have between, kind of storage and its workload. When you consider, it might take 5 SSDs with a large throughput to saturate a 16 gig fiber channel network, local storage is kind of, quite key when it comes to sort of like massive throughput, especially for reads overall. So in that really, doesn't do Nutanix justice in the kind of way, what we approach or what we deliver out as our infrastructure. And we often hear people talk to us and say, well, you're just another HCI solution. And we like to say, obviously, we are the hyper-converged solution. Obviously, we pioneered this market. We'd like to think we've got a head start on others in that journey too. But not all HCI solutions are created equally. We kind of, I think, we built this based on distributed systems principles. So from the ground up, no single point of failure, no single point of control, no bottlenecks at scale, and leveraging things like MapReduce for concurrency. It's something that not a lot of vendors do in their environment. This choice of hypervisor hardware, and what we definitely aren't is a vSAN. People ask us, well, maybe you're just a virtual SAN. Absolutely not. We don't take SAN technology and build that into our platform. We've got this way that we've created and crafted our own I/O path, the way that we have information lifecycle built in, hierarchical storage. There's really some quite intelligent things that we do in our platform, and I'll ping a link in the chat afterwards to a site where we explain a lot of that in depth and the history. And I think if you read through that, it should give you a good sort of flavour. But it's all about intelligent software, really. We were a company that makes a hyperconverged solution. We were very much infrastructure focused in the first years. We've then become, what we term a private cloud company to try and bring that automation and the flexibility that the cloud gives you into the on-premise environment. And then we've kind of extended that now into our cloud, our hybrid multi-cloud offering. And part of our intelligent software is the way we deliver that. And then the other part of that is the way, because we're x86, we can actually deploy into public cloud environments. So, storage, Kubernetes, databases, VDI optimizations, we've got all of that capability built into our platform. Object storage, file storage, block storage, we can deliver out from that, as well as the hyperconverged storage. Things like DRs built in, micro-segmentations built into the platform. And then, we're sort of a preferred solution for some of our alliance partners, OpenShift and Citrix, for example, for their relevant environments. So that's kind of a real, quick high level, and I'll move on swiftly about why, what Nutanix is about. But then you got to ask, well, why are you in the cloud? Well, if you imagine, we've been doing cloud 1 to 2 decades now. Some companies are still starting out in that. There's complexities in cloud. I mean, if I was in charge for the day, right, I would personally put all net new workloads into platform services. I think arguably that's probably the way to get the best use out of public cloud. So net new in public cloud, go cloud native off the bat, leverage the loose coupling, etc., etc. But we have a lot of companies that rehost virtual machine workloads, and that's fine, right? But use infrastructure as a service. But arguably, that's the kind of potentially. It's still good use, but you do pay a premium to host virtual machines in public cloud, but you get the benefits of the adjacency to all these platform services. But then when you speak to companies that do move virtual machines, not a lot of them move factor, and kind of even less, may refactor successfully. And when I say successfully, people do obviously, but when you talk about time, when you talk about cost, and when you talk about risk, in doing that, taking an application and refactoring it just to do the same thing elsewhere doesn't offer much business benefit. So there needs to be a kind of wider driver within that overall. So that's where we like to come in with NC2, because what we announced with Microsoft was a jointly engineered solution between Nutanix and Microsoft, unlike anything else Microsoft currently do, apart from one exception. And I'll quiz you on that in a moment, because it's probably not the thing that you're thinking it is. But we've come up with a bare metal solution that is actually integrated into your Azure account. It's not a separate service. It's integrated into your account. So we've written the APIs from the ground up to deliver a truly dynamic cloud service for our Nutanix offering. So you can deploy, scale, and delete on demand. And that's gone live now. We're live in 9 regions globally, and we've got kind of three regions in EMEA currently, some others in US and Asia Pac, and that's going to grow in the second wave of deployments overall. 2 node types currently, but again, that's going to be growing with kind of compute heavy and storage heavy nodes overall. So what exactly is it, right? Well, what we're doing is we're basically taking this bare metal solution that Azure have, and we're deploying our software onto it, our hypervisor, and we're virtualizing out these bare metal nodes. So instead of you deploying to an Azure virtual machine on a hypervisor host that Microsoft own and run, what we do is we give our customers, us and Microsoft, give our customers a bare metal node running a Nutanix cluster in exactly the same manner that they've got it running on-prem. And so that's quite a ground shift, because what you get is the benefit of virtualization. I'll cover more of that in a moment. So it's our software on x86 hardware, just happens to be running in cloud. It runs within your account, right, in a subscription that you own. It basically deploys onto a VNet. We'll talk more about networking in a moment. And when you look at this picture, it really kind of does sum it up for me. Prism is our management console, and this gives you a consistent way of managing virtual machine workloads across both on-prem and in public cloud. So you've got a single way of managing your virtual machines. So when people talk about hybrid multi-cloud, they often say, well, I go to this portal here to access it, in this cloud, and this portal over here, and on-prem I do it slightly differently, and it's a different image over there, and over there there's different steps to complete the same task. What we're talking about here now is a single way of working across all of these different environments, and we include some other cloud providers and cloud service providers in this solution as well. So it's a single way of working, but it does have the adjacency of all the platform services. So you're in Azure, but we're just doing the virtualization for you and running that in a cluster that's running Nutanix rather than, say, like a modified Hyper-V cluster running that out. So you get the benefit of virtualization. You get to make some choices about things like overcommitment, but you get that into operation. So yeah, we use AN36 and AN36P nodes, which AVS uses, I believe, as well. And so we can talk more about that in a moment. And but unlike AVS, what we aren't is a separate service. We're actually a bare metal service in Azure, which is dynamic. So you can go and create a cluster in the morning, scale it in the afternoon, and delete it in the evening. You don't need to sign up to us for 6 months or a year minimum lock-in. VMware or Nutanix, or Microsoft don't manage this for you. It's your cluster. They do the hardware, obviously, things like the firmware on the actual node, but you own the cluster yourself. You decide what version goes onto it. You decide how it integrates back on-prem, for example. So you've got some really great benefits here. You've got the ability to use the same tooling that you got on-prem. You can do layer 2 stretch networking at a Nutanix level. And you've then got this adjacency to platform services, so you can integrate in with Azure. And we find this really of interest to a lot of kind of like companies that have this whole bimodal approach to IT. The more agile part of the company and the more agile part of the company, working, kind of more in the sort of like, the kind of like the Azure console, doing stuff with platform services, and then maybe the traditional data center operations using VMs. So we're not Archon servers. We support Arc. We've got kind of Arc integrations with our Kubernetes and data services, and we support it for servers as well. So we can complement Arc as well, but a lot of the stuff you have in our management, can be done by Prism. So there's a slight bit of complementing, conflicting, competing between Arc and Prism. But if you want to use that, I think one of the mantras for Nutanix is freedom to choose. Whatever you want to do it, right? Doesn't matter. You can use us, you can use something else, and that goes back to the hardware. Use whatever hardware you like. Use the hardware in this cloud provider or that cloud provider, or HP or Dell or Fujitsu or Lenovo or yada yada yada. Choose whatever hypervisor you want. Hyper-V, Nutanix hypervisor, AHV, ESX. Then you've also got Zen Server kind of like pulling into that as well. In the past, I think we dropped support for Zen Server now. And the same is then for sort of the management tooling. If you want to run VMware and on-prem and you still want to use vCenter, then that's fine. But Prism carries out a lot of those tasks as well. But the true value comes when you run Nutanix top to bottom overall. So I'm going to try and skip forward really, so we can jump into sort of some other bits. So I think some of the key technical features are pretty much mentioned all of these. portability, for example. You buy Nutanix, you can transfer those licenses around between environments. Elastic resource, no sign up, no commitment, just buy, build, delete on demand. We integrate natively with Azure VNets. I've kind of pretty much mentioned all of those. And I think because we own the hypervisor, or you own the hypervisor, you get a couple of things. You get predictable performance because you're getting a cluster node that you own can over commit, and you can overcommit, and then you also get the ability to right size workloads on the host with NVMe storage, so you're not kind of forced of like jumping up tiers or image size to get things like IO and throughput. You get that off the bat for every single workload. I've seen a few more chats come in. I think I'll get through these slides and we'll start knocking those off as we go through, because there's a few bits we can point out, and I can point you to some good links. So I think one of the things we say really sort of like, to customers is like, you get to cloud quickly, you can kind of do it with reduced risk, less cost potentially. And if you want to migrate to become cloud native, then you can use us as a stepping stone. And some of those benefits to reduce the cost is, that consistent performance. You can overcommit workloads to whatever, overcommitment ratio you want, right size them. If you want a 3 CPU, 9 gig of RAM VM, you can do that. You don't have to jump up a t-shirt size, for example, and any unused resource that you don't use, you can obviously, use that for other workloads to basically get better density on that server overall. So second to last slide, I promise. So some of the key features that we have in our unique relationship with Microsoft is on NC2, you get your Azure hybrid benefits. So you get the ability to basically use those and transfer those for Windows and SQL. We're on the marketplace, so you can buy term-based licenses or you can buy on-demand licenses via the marketplace. And if you've got a Mac agreement, commit to consume, those licenses and the bare metal nodes can both contribute to drawing down on that Mac agreement. Support CSP, so if you're going for a partner, for example, you can delegate out a subscription to them and they can host Nutanix for you. And the extended security updates also apply overall. So to sum up all of that stuff, really, what Nutanix provides you, this single control plane for your virtual machine workloads between on-prem and cloud, consistent governance and processes, the mobility between locations. It's really a true hybrid multi-cloud, and that's kind of I think as much as I want to kind of get into the slides really before we jump in. So. Okay, let's jump through and have a look at some of these questions. So I'm going to go from the bottom up. AV said same physical spec, but it's a Nutanix specific instance. Yeah, so yeah, same node. It's a Dell. It's a Dell R640 node. I think it is. I think that's what underpins that at the end of the day. And that's kind of, but yeah, it's the kind of same node that's being used, I think, over on the other side. But again, where AVS is a separate kind of service that's managed by VMware / Microsoft with an express route into your environment, then you've got kind of and that's managed. You don't get to integrate it with your on-prem environment. So if you're using kind of VMware Cloud, for example, it doesn't fully integrate. It's a separate management point, and that might suit some people that perhaps don't want to have that kind of integration or lock-in. But we're something that integrates. We're treating this like another data center, if you like, in Azure, but a data center with benefits. Do you need global reach? If you need, yeah, we support express route. There are some caveats on networking which I can throw up on the screen, but all we need is a VPN or express route for you to be able to get connectivity overall. And yeah, so again, the Alan, the question about Arc, not really Arc, but yeah, you can enable Arc on the workloads just as you would. And we've got, I think, greater integration with our Kubernetes distribution that we've got with our Nutanix Kubernetes engine and our storage, our persistent storage that backs up with that. Good. So let's get into sort of the meat and veg. So if we take a look at this is pretty much what the environment looks like, fully built up. Let's make sure. Let's step back one. This is kind of a high level overview of what we deploy. So we have when we deploy two VNets that are deployed. So one has our virtualization hosts in it, and there's an Azure native subnet, and that's delegated to a service, and that's where our virtualization hosts live. We then have another VNet, which is where we deploy our Prism environment, and that's our management console and all of our kind of, where our virtual machines would live. Now, what we do slightly differently than kind of an Azure virtual machine, for example, instead of creating a subnet that you attach your virtual machines to, what we do is we use the Azure VNet as an underlay for our overlay networking. So we have an overlay network. We can do lots of different things like micro segmentation for it. We can create virtualized environments, isolated environments. So we introduce our flow networking into Azure to provide capabilities to kind of users of the solution. And what that does, what that gives us ultimately is the ability to do 3 networking types. So we can do a no-NAT environment, basically a subnet that's fully routable back to your on-prem environment. We can do a NATed environment, something isolated, maybe for differing environments or multi-tenanted environments. And we can issue out things like floating IPs, which are Azure native, and then use Azure load balancing to get access to them. We can also do stretched layer 2, so you can have an on-prem subnet stretched into Azure, and you can do failover without any change of IP address overall. And that all goes out through our Flow gateway. So Flow is our networking technology, and this Flow gateway, it's going to be an availability set of virtual machines. BGP support's coming with that, and we basically got this Azure native set of virtual machines that acts as that gateway onto the Azure VNet to act as the underlay for our network transport overall. So that's kind of like in a real high level. What we can then do, whether it's in your resource group or not here, is we can peer to your hub VNet and get access back to on-prem, get access to things like private endpoints. I mean, you can put private endpoints kind of anywhere, right? But we can get access back to your on-prem environment, or however whatever your internet breakout is, via kind of configuring our networking to communicate with that. We'll be supporting Azure Root Server soon, so that will kind of give us more options when we support BGP with this overall. So that should give us kind of some options around it. So how are we doing? Any questions there? And while we're good, if anyone's got a question, feel free to come off mute and ask the question. So when we set this up, we do it via a console, and that console is something that lives in Nutanix, but we set it up in Azure. So basically, when a customer wants to start on their journey with Nutanix clusters, they go to the My Nutanix portal and they create what we term an organization. It's just a placeholder for configuring your cloud accounts. And you configure your cloud accounts for the clouds that we support. And basically, there's just a little bit of setup in Azure that you need to do. Create a subscription or reuse one. You create a AD app registration, give that a secret. Those are the details you put in here. You then validate that. You've then got a cloud account set up. You can then build a cluster. So I can come into this a customer. Once that's set up and the small bit of setup is completed in Azure, can come into this area, click on general purpose for the licensing type. They can then choose their organization that they're going to deploy to, give the customer a name, choose the cloud provider, choose your region, and then you can go through the deployment. And so here you can see we've got the AN36P node, 36 cores, 768 gig of RAM. And I say we've got some more node types coming on the horizon for that. You choose your size of cluster that you want. This redundancy factor is the failures to tolerate. So failures to tolerate 1 or 2 equals a replication factor of 2 or 3. So failure to tolerate 1, we replicate the data at least twice, so that if one fails, we've got a spare copy of it. And we always treat data kind of resilience as our key priority. Going back to that map reduce algorithms, we massively parallel, you know what I mean? We massively run workloads together so that we kind of reprotect data instantly, and we use all the nodes in the cluster and all the disks in a node to make sure that we process stuff massively fast to give, throughput, especially for high latency, high frequency, low latency workloads. And we're seeing kind of increasing adoption of that with things like financial services. So you choose your cluster size. You've then got an option of using an existing VNet, so you can conduct some of this setup manually yourself prior to it, create all the VNets, etc. Or you can choose for the for the tool to create the whole kind of structure for you. So here, for example, let me just pop some random details in. So we give, first of all, the VNet that our hosts are going to be on. Doesn't need to be a 16, it can be much lower, /25. We then choose our licensing type, which is a Nutanix thing, a Nutanix tier, Nutanix version. We then configure the second part of that, which is our kind of network where we have all our user VMs. And again, we give that a subnet big enough to cater for whatever we need. We determine the version of our management software, and then we configure our flow gateways, which give you a certain amount of throughput depending on the size you take. And there's more going to be a massive amount more scalability that goes through here. And then you can choose a key pair that's used to get access to some of those resources. Click on next, summarize that, click create, and then within a couple of hours you'll have a cluster up and running. And here's one I've deployed earlier. Let's have a look. In fact, I'm going to look at this one here because it's got 3 nodes in it, and this one I've got here has just got 1 node at the moment. So this is a running cluster. It's running in Azure, and we can see that we've got these hosts within the environment. So a key thing about owning that virtualization layer is you own the virtualization, you own the host. If you feel that there's a problem with this host, you can condemn it and automatically replace it. So bear that in mind. If you've got a lot of problem with a host that physically, it's a data center visit by an engineer, you can do this almost automatically. And in fact, we do it automatically, because if we recognize there's a problem with the host, we'll automatically initiate that replacement. So if you have a node fail, bang, another node's going to be put back in the cluster straight away. And that gives you options, right, about how kind of like, risk averse you are. Do you want to go N+2 for a larger cluster? Or are you okay with N+1? Or are you okay squeezing N+1 a little bit, because you can replace nodes almost at will? Audit trail, network details, kind of what you deployed, what kind of VNets you're on, the flow gateway size, you can change the details. And then we can do things like, for example, scale this cluster out. I can add more nodes into the cluster on demand if I've got a peak workload, and I can scale back those nodes if that peak workload subsides. And I can link that in with things like APIs to do that automatically for me. I can change the software tier, and ultimately I can just kill this cluster off. As I've kind of mentioned before, it's dynamic. I don't need to be signed up to it kind of full time, right? So that's what it looks like to build it. When you build it in Azure, in your resource group, you look in there. If I show hidden node types and I look at a group it by type, you can see all the usual things that you would see within within Azure normally, right? Availability sets, disks for the flow gateway. Some of the hidden things that you see here, like the network interfaces, IP addresses, etc., the public IP addresses that are used for things like the NAT gateways as well, and the 2 VNets which are peer to each other. But then we've also got the cluster nodes. So again, this is the 1 node cluster, and we can see there's not really much you can do with this through the Azure portal, because we don't really want you deleting or controlling it through here. We do that through the portal that I showed you that's kind of on the Nutanix side of this. But what we're doing here is we're giving you that ability to deploy a Nutanix cluster into Azure and start to consume Azure native capabilities. So create your private endpoint, expose whatever service you want, and then our user VMs can get access to that. Our user VMs can get access to that capability via that kind of internal IP address to be able to consume that service. And if you're on us and you're running and you're doing things more cost effectively perhaps than you would do with Azure VMs, or you're getting benefits by running a similar control plane on-prem and in cloud for your virtual machines, you've now got the benefit of those VMs being highly connected into the Azure kind of like backend services. So this is Prism. So this is kind of, you know, our central environment. We've got the ability to have multiple clusters managed by this central manager, and you can jump down into each of the individual clusters to see more detail. So this is the cluster, and you can see here that it's pulling out that it's on an Azure Ready node. The critical notifications I've got here are purely because I'm using a one node cluster for test and for cost purposes, obviously. So we need three nodes in a cluster by default to provide us that resilience for our data and services. So within here, just to give you a very quick sort of idea about Nutanix and sort of Prism, the way that we integrate is via our virtual private clouds or via our flow networking. And here we create our VPCs, our virtual private clouds, where within those we can do things like no NAT layer 2 stretch, and so we can create our subnets. So you are creating these at a Nutanix level, so they're in some ways not exposed at the Azure level until they go out through that flow gateway, and then they could be native IP addresses to you, or they could be floating IP addresses, for example. And we can also, you know, stretch subnets. So I've got a network here that's been stretched from an on-prem environment. I've got a natted environment and a no natted environment. I'm not sure if this machine is up, just to give you kind of an idea. I'm disconnected. I might try and reconnect into that virtual machine in a second. Let me have a look at that. Let's open the console. I'll come back to that in a second. But you then got the ability to kind of like, you know, run our kind of like your Nutanix software in many different ways, whatever it means to you. So just to give you an example, that this is the virtual machine. If I look at that, it's got an IP address of 20.20.20.20. So this is my command prompt for my local machine. I'm out on the internet, and I won't be able to ping that. It's in a natted environment. But what I've actually done is I've used our floating IP addresses that we have to expose or to map one of those VMs into one of the Azure public IPs into that virtual machine. And so here, if I go to ping that, I'm going to get a response back from that virtual machine. So I've kind of like, you know, mapped that IP address, that public IP address, to this private IP address internally. So it gives you the ability, that VM can contact out, talk to the internet, and that might be applicable, this natted environment might be applicable for, you know, perhaps having the same IP addresses for production, non-production, UAT, test dev. But if you want things like complete network connectivity, and you just want this as another kind of cluster within your environment where everything can communicate to everything else, you can then just have a no NAT environment. So you just have a unique IP address, and you basically get out with that address and talk back to on-prem. You know, there's no difference in it just being another subnet. I think just kind of like wrapping the bits up here, just looking at Prism, you've got built into this single control plane those things I mentioned. So we've got, you know, the ability to do all your virtual machine, your images, create OVAs, you know, kind of storage policies. But we've then got network security built into here, micro-segmentation and the like. We can also do our data protection, replication between Nutanix clusters and kind of other solutions, and basically create, you know, orchestrated disaster recovery. Obviously, the other parts as well that you would expect, you know, around activity, health, monitoring are all included. But then we start to come into some of our things that we feel are quite unique for us, our capacity management, operational policies. That's kind of, you know, our playbooks, the ability to do things like if that, then this, built into the platform overall. So codeless automation. And if you absolutely want to get into automation, we've got that built into the platform by some of the kind of additional services that we have, pardon me, by some of the additional services that we have built into the platform overall. So we have a lot of capability sort of built into this platform. But all the time, this is sitting on Azure, and it's next to Azure, and it's using the Azure service. And back to that earlier comment where I said, you know, we're, you know, one of only 2 bare metal services. I bet you're all thinking it was Azure VMware service. It's not. It's SAP HANA, right? So us and SAP are the only natively integrated bare metal as a service, integrated in the way that we integrate with Azure. Like I said, the other things like NetApp, they're kind of separate services that are kind of managed by someone else. This is really a bare metal service for you to be able to bring your Nutanix infrastructure into Azure and get the benefits of Nutanix being, you know, a hybrid multi-cloud environment for your virtual machines, while at the same time having the adjacency to all the platform services and all the capability that you've got into Azure via, you know, internal Azure IP addresses via private endpoints. And if you look at that, you've got the kind of the detail on this site. This is a very good site. I'll post some of these links out later. One bit just to finally sort of finish on before we'll sort of pause for a moment to take some questions is when you pop down this, you'll come to this solution design tab here, and you'll see, you know, there are some caveats around networking. One thing I do want to point out is we get lots and lots of questions about, oh, you can't use security groups, or you can't use private endpoints. It's got to remind you that's via Azure delegated subnets. That's where kind of our hosts live here, and that's typically not something you integrate with. When we talk about our networking and our virtual machines, because they're using this overlay network, they don't suffer from any of those limitations. So we've had these documents updated to spell out that they're from these delegated subnets and they're not from the kind of Nutanix networking. We spell that out in our documentation, but it's worth pointing out because we get kind of like a few negative comments about, well, you don't support private endpoints. How are my VMs going to get access to internal access to these services? Well, they can. It's just kind of the understanding or the way that this is stated in here. So there we go. I think my time's up. Really, I think kind of I've probably 1 minute over. I just yeah, just want to ask: are there any questions? Anything anybody wants to know? I could go on all night if you don't stop me. Right? It's.
I think. Can you hear me all right first, Darren?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, cool. No, I think you've done well. Keep up the questions in the chat, but no, fantastic. Kind of run through, to be honest, Darren. I think from the perspective of, you know, help me understand, because I noticed you flash up that slide there. Of course, it's like an extension of Nutanix into that kind of public cloud world with the cloud clusters.
Yeah.
What are the, you know, what kind of customers typically do you see adopting this version of Nutanix? Is it net new customers looking to use Nutanix for reasons of skilling or familiarity with the hypervisor, or what customers you tend to see, Darren, just to kind of frame that bit?
Yeah, so you've got to say really that to get the most benefit, you've got to be using Nutanix on-prem. So that's where you get the whole kind of hybrid multi-cloud approach. So we typically see a lot of our interest, the majority of our interest is from existing customers. However, our existing customers were not customers once, and they deployed their first ever Nutanix cluster for the first time in a data center somewhere. And we're seeing an increasing number of customers taking NC2 as their first way to deploy a Nutanix cluster. So, you know, you've got to deploy a cluster somewhere. What better way to do it without having to own a data center, without having to buy hardware, by trying something that you can, you know, turn off if you feel that it's not for you. And also, you know, we give 33 days of Nutanix licenses for a trial. And Microsoft have been very generous. And the first time customers sign up to this service, customers get 33 days of bare metal node costs free of charge. So you can try it. You can try this out for limited, you know, cost. There are some things you will pay for: network egress, NAT gateways, you know, the virtual machines, Azure virtual machines that the solution deploys. But we see an increasing number of customers exploring Nutanix, finding out about NC2 and say, well, actually, I'll test it out on that. I mean, we can host environments for customers to test, but they're kind of very interested in being able to do it on Azure with that connectivity to Azure. Yeah, I'm not too sure. We at the moment we support a little bit of Terraform. We don't really support kind of much else. The deployment, I've got to say, at the moment is manual as I've shown it, and we're looking at ways to automate that overall. Just seeing that question come in, but yeah, we're kind of as kind of things grow, we'll be supporting more and more ways to be able to develop that, right, and sort of like automate that overall.
Oh, thanks, Darren. No, that's great. Look, like I say, I think you've done a really, great job of giving us that overview, and it's great to see, obviously, things like extended usage, extended security updates are available as well. The whole Mac marketplace piece that you brought up there they're all compelling reasons to kind of, like you say, I mean, yeah, maybe if you're not a Nutanix customer at the moment, it's one of those things, but that's the one thing that going to be an interesting thing to kind of work out with. Is it just Nutanix customers net, or is there a USP to bring that onto Azure as a net new customer? That'll be an interesting one. And look, feedback, any information.
Yeah,
I think it's all great stuff, right?
Yeah, and I think really the main ones we see is people using Azure as a DR site for maybe an on-prem environment, shutting data centers. We see a little bit of scalability, but we also see people wanting to adopt cloud and actually staying on NC2. And I'll post a reference. I'll post a couple of links to what I've shown, and that thing I mentioned about learning about Nutanix is called the Nutanix Bible. So I'll post that, and I'll post a couple of references as well for you to take a look at. I think John's dropped off again there. So, oh, you there? You back, John?
Yeah, very much possible. I'll let Matt take over. I'm on the M50 now, so just wanted to say hello to Dean before we introduce him. But no, if you can hear me still, thanks, Darren. Really appreciate it. We'll catch up. But Matt, do you want to take over in case I'm
got it covered. Yeah, you carry on, mate. Yeah, thanks very much, Darren. That was really good. And I'm sure that our next guest needs no introduction. He's Mr. Licensing. Come on. So we'll hand over to you then, Dean. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Matt. My mic doesn't look like it's working. Now it's working. Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah, it's loud and clear, mate.
Good. I've literally just got back off the train, so yeah, hopefully everything's fine. Let's see. Right. Okay. Just going to set my screen up. Bear with me a second. Okay, good. Right, thank you for the invitation to come and talk to you. So I'm Dean. I work for a company called Ontinu, and we are sort of Swiss-based, but with offices in Zurich, London, Redwood City, and Noida. And I'm a security MVP and an enterprise ability MVP, mainly for the stuff I do on YouTube and stuff I do in the community. And this talk really is going to cover a security solution called Defender for IoT. And I've got a nice pun in the title there. Hopefully you spot that. And it's technically a network detection and response solution from Microsoft. And I'm going to talk to you a little bit about what it is and hopefully a live demo. Now, I did do this demo a couple of weeks back, and it took an hour and a half. So I'm going to try and cut that down a bit using some techniques that I've learned from YouTube and just doing a hard cut, cutting out the boring bits, and then skipping. You might not even notice it, but let's see how we get on. Okay, so firstly, you've probably heard of IoT. But it stands for Internet of Things, and it's a term that refers to that's meant to be a video, but that's not going very well at all. It's meant to be a term that refers to the network of physical machines, devices, sensors, or other things that are connected to the internet. And typically, they communicate, collect data, and exchange data as well. So my screen is going a bit funny, so I'm going to try and move things around. So it can include things like there's my video. It can include things like smart home devices, things like the Amazon Echo and Google Home, and these things typically just sit in your office or at home, just listening for wake words, as you know, to kind of do what you ask. They can also include things like smart wearable devices, like the Apple Watch or the Fitbit. But and these are really the things that are known as the Internet of Things, and there's smart fridges and all these kind of things as well, because these communicate, collect, and exchange data, right? And I'm explaining this because I want you to know that this is not what I'm going to be talking about today, because whilst this is interesting and also Internet of Things, the title was Defender for IoT, and I want to talk about what Defender for IoT does, not just IoT in general. Now, John and I, when Defender for IoT first came out, I approached John and said, look, you know a lot about IoT, and I know a little bit about Defender. Surely we can figure out how Defender for IoT works. And if John could speak, maybe he'd back me up. We spent a couple of hours just playing with it, trying to figure out what it was, and were fully confused by the end of that 2-hour session. And so that was a while ago, and I've spent a long time trying to figure out how it works. I went to Israel and spoke to the team there from the CyberX team that built Defender for IoT as CyberX, and it was acquired by Microsoft not long ago, which started Defender for IoT. So I've learned a bit more. I thought I'd share that. And so, like I say, this talk isn't about solving problems for these types of devices. It's about these types of devices. So operational technology, which is not IoT, really. So operational technology is hardware and software that its purpose is to monitor and control the performance of physical devices. It's right there on the screen. That's the job of operational technology normally. And that can include things like power distribution, manufacturing, water treatment, and many, many more. And we can even connect this to the cloud and use things like machine learning, big data and analytics on these. So we know that we're surrounded by OT and we depend on OT. You can see some of the things in this video here are things that we pretty much depend on. Our lives depend on some of them. So it's probably worth securing them, right? If they're insecure. But are they insecure? How do we know? So what's the risk? Well, aside from the blindingly obvious risk that someone could hack like an elevator or a roller coaster and it's some kind of twist on ransomware, hopefully that doesn't happen. There are some things that have happened that I want to just quickly touch on. Firstly, this one's a little while ago. 2014, steel mill in Germany was hacked through spear phishing. They got access to the blast furnace, which was OT, and shut it down without following the proper procedure, and that caused massive damage, in their words. Similarly, a dam in New York, slightly outside of New York, was the target of an attack by Iranian hackers, and it didn't actually do much because this particular dam was offline for repair. But if they had accessed the right dam, because they got confused with the name, there was the Bowman Dam and there was the Arthur Bowman Dam, but it turns out they got confused with the name apparently and chose the wrong dam to attack, and this one was offline. But if they'd picked the right one and got in, then it might have been devastating for a few hundred farms in the area. So this is not new. This is over 10 years old in some cases, the problem. If we look at more recently, in 2021, the Tampa water system was hacked, and the attacker increased the sodium hydroxide level to 100 times the safe level in that water. That product is commonly used in drain cleaners, so it's a pretty big deal. Thankfully, it was noticed by an operator, and they reversed that and no one was hurt, apparently, according to that water company. And finally, the Iranian rail signage system, I chuckle because unprecedented chaos paints a picture in my mind of what might happen if an attacker took control of the rail signage system for Iran. And yeah, there's no actual information about how that actually happened, but you can see it could be devastating in many cases. My screen's just gone black, so Matt, can you just confirm that you can still hear and see me?
I can still hear and see you. Yep. Are you showing case 4 at the moment?
Okay. Oh, it's back. Good. Sorry. Right. Hopefully that doesn't happen again. So why is OT so vulnerable? Why is operational technology so vulnerable? And that's typically because OT is used in legacy systems. So these environments would be normally 30 years old, maybe more in some cases, because they're typically machines that are built for a purpose, and that purpose doesn't change over the lifetime of building a car, for example. That part of the car doesn't change, so then the machine doesn't change and need to be adapted. So the length of these systems' use is typically longer. And it's harder to patch systems that are 30 years old. If you ever tried to patch a Windows 7 machine, you'll understand. If you look at the ability to implement patches in general, the machines are typically on 24/7 because the machines will be working throughout the day and night, not like users and servers where we can sometimes turn the servers off and reboot them. And patching is not a priority. So because there's no clear ownership between OT and IT teams, from a security perspective, it's not clear who makes the decisions to whether a machine should be turned off in the case of a specific vulnerability. And because of the cost associated with patching a machine, the risk tolerance from the security officer, if there is one responsible for OT, is usually much higher than the IT world. And that's why OT is so vulnerable. And so the solution, at least the solution from Microsoft, is Microsoft Defender for IoT. Microsoft acquired Defender for IoT, or the CyberX platform, from CyberX a couple of years ago, and adapted it to be integrated with Azure, and I'll talk about some of the integration in a few moments. If we look at a typical use case, this could be, it's not very imaginative, but it could be a production facility with a supply chain office at the top there and a back office facility elsewhere in a different building. And typically we would see OT devices on the left hand side there in the production facility, and those might be Honeywell devices, Siemens devices, and specific devices working on particular OT protocols. They're not talking over IP. They're not going to get a DHCP address from the router and start talking over IP. They communicate over the wire, but specifically on OT protocols. And so it's quite hard for traditional security tools to figure out what's being said because they're not communicating on IP, and so they don't know who is talking to who unless you look at the actual traffic itself. And so if we look at the other side on the supply chain, these devices typically can be covered by traditional security systems. Defender for Endpoint, for example, can discover devices that have IP addresses, and it can even have agents on some of these devices and use those to look around the network and see what's happening. So we've got these two types of device, the IT, the also have enterprise IoT, which is things like smart printers, those kind of things, smart door locks, cameras. They will be enterprise IoT. And then you have OT. And again, we're talking about OT in this particular case because that's what I've been focusing on for the past year or so. If we look at a topology for a Defender for IoT typical implementation, the production facility that I just talked about there is at the bottom. On the left-hand side, you've got the production facility. On the right-hand side, you've got that supply chain and back office environment. This is your network, and we can't put an agent on these devices, on these OT devices. So we need to collect the information somehow, and we do that by using a span port, a switch port, analyzer port in Cisco terminology, or a mirroring port in other switch terminology. Most switches these days are capable of doing that if they're managed, or even good home switches now have mirroring facilities on them. And so that span port sends information, or sends all the traffic, to the sensor, and the sensor is a physical appliance or a virtual appliance within that network, within that site, as we call it. And that sensor uses OT aware analytics to figure out what's going on within the network, and it understands when things are good and when things are bad. And in a lot of cases, it's obvious when things are bad, and in a lot of cases, it's not obvious when things are bad. So we have to do what we call learning. There's a learning period of at least 6 weeks, and also a tuning period which goes on in parallel to give the sensor some information about the environment so that it can make the right call when it comes to deciding if something is good or bad. We then have Azure Defender for IoT, now Microsoft Defender for IoT. It's an old picture, sorry. It's also not mine, by the way, it is Microsoft's. That should be pointed out. And that's in the cloud. and then we have Sentinel, and the alerts from Azure Defender for IoT go to Sentinel. What we had in the past with CyberX was they had an on-premises not sensor management console, and that would aggregate the data from the alerts and the information from all the different sensors in the environment, because you typically have more than one in a production environment. So you needed some way to aggregate them and see all that information without having to log into each of them. CyberX solved that by having an on-premises management console. Microsoft has solved it by using the cloud service, Microsoft Defender for IoT. And so you still can have an on-premises management console if you need that. You just have an extra box set in the environment, and then it kind of does all the stuff that you would do in the Azure portal for Defender for IoT. So you don't need both. Obviously, Sentinel is where you would send all that information typically, so you can report on it. No, not reporting, so you can use the features of Sentinel to do whatever you need from a response perspective. So from a physical appliance standpoint, Microsoft gives some sizing that you might need. And this is, you can see the max monitored assets there is 12,000. That's on the larger side, and typically you would have a site with 12,000. You would normally have multiple smaller sensors rather than one big sensor. But you can see there the sensor size is 32 CPUs, 32 gig RAM, and 5.6 terabytes of storage. It's analyzing an awful lot of traffic at one time, because all these devices are sending data directly to that via the mirroring port. From my testing, when I started working on this, got some appliances from Open Systems where I work, now called Continue, and these were the NDR machines that we use for our security service, or their security service now. And these work very well as Defender for IoT appliances with the right kind of sizing. I now work on virtual, mainly because the virtual is easier for me to demo, and it means that the talk doesn't last an hour and a half. So hopefully that's going to play out right. I want to pause there and ask if there are any questions.
No. Everyone.
I can't see Teams. Sorry, I don't know why I've got my screen laid out the way I have, but I can't see Teams. But good. Okay, so over to the demo. Let's see how I do this. There it is. Hopefully that works. I do prefer YouTube, if I'm honest, than doing talks live, just because I can cut this bit out, kind of fixing my own stuff. Okay, so if we head to the Azure portal and search for Defender for IoT, we get to this portal here. You don't need a license for Defender for IoT in order to get to this portal. All of this stuff that you can see right now is probably available to you without a license. The license becomes needed when you want to activate a sensor, which we'll do in a little while. So I'm going to quickly go through this portal. Please let me know if I go over time, Matt, because I will just forget and I'll keep talking. As I say, it took an hour and a half last time and it wasn't good. Thanks, Matt. So if we look at the top, we've got these two types of IoT, OT and industrial control systems, and industrial IoT, and building management systems or sensors, networks. So these are the OT that we're talking about here, and then you've got enterprise IoT on the right there. Now you'll notice here, if I scroll down a bit, I can click Set up OT ICS Security, and that will take me over to one of the bits of this portal. And if I look over it here and I look at enterprise IoT, none of this takes me to anywhere in this portal, because this isn't managed here. This is managed in the Defender portal. So if I show you security.microsoft.com and log in, And you will have seen this if you've used the Defender portal before or seen any demonstrations of it. If you scroll down, may not have Defender for Endpoint in this environment. I don't have Defender for Endpoint in this environment. Anyway, when you have Defender for Endpoint enabled and you search for and you go to devices, it offers you to onboard devices to Defender for IoT, and that's referring to enterprise IoT devices, not OT devices. It's very confusing, and you can hopefully see why John and I were very confused at the start. It isn't clear. I don't think it's clear. Back over to Defender for IoT. Over to the top, you can see we've got this sensor tab, on-premises management console, and then updates. The sensor tab is where we can buy a pre-configured appliance from Arrow, and they'll configure it and send it to you, and you plug it in, and you're pretty much good to go. I'll show you how far you are along in a few moments. If you've purchased an appliance and need to install it, then you go for this one and you download the software. When we choose this drop down and then choose download, it will download the ISO. I don't need to download the ISO, so I'm not going to do that. But I wanted to point out the hilarious numbering system here. This is not in numerical order at all. I don't know what kind of order it's in, but it's not. Just be aware that if you want to download the next version before it isn't the one underneath. It's somewhere else. Not a great experience. So if we download that, we can then move down in this page to we download that. I'm going to go to we download that, and then we'll move over to the virtual environment in a second. I want to show you the on-premises management console because the setup is exactly the same, because you would set it up on a physical or virtual device. You can purchase a device from Arrow, or you can download the software, or you can download the update for that software. I'm not going to be talking about an on-premises management console here because I don't need one. The Azure portal does everything. There was a time when there wasn't feature parity between the Azure portal and the on-premises management console. Now there is, because they're constantly developing the service as is typical with Microsoft products. They're building it over time and making it better and better. And they now have feature parity. So for me, unless you have a segregated environment, then you aren't going to need the on-premises management console. The updates tab there is just there to fill a space because it doesn't let you update anything. You have to go to the sites and sensors page, and it's just there for, I don't know why it's there still. If we go to sites and sensors and choose onboard a sensor and choose OT, because it is possible to have an enterprise IoT sensor that you build from this portal. I'm not going to go into that. Just choose OT, and we get here, and then we get to choose. We go through these steps. So did you set up a sensor? Yes, I have set up a sensor. We then configure a span port, and here is a very, very simplified explanation of what a span port is in 4 pictures. I think they've done pretty well to articulate that in 4 pictures. And then you get to register the sensor with Defender for IoT. So we choose a name, we choose the subscription, we choose that it's cloud connected because of all the benefits you get from cloud connecting these devices, this platform. We want to automatically update it, and we want to give it a resource. We need to give it some names and that kind of thing. So we'll go through that in a moment. The first thing I need to do, though, is get this sensor up and running. So we'll quickly do that. I'm going to log back into this because it's logged me out, and hopefully it gets me in quickly. There we go. So when we start, we have when you start with building a virtual machine, it's typically empty, and you have to do some stuff to make it have something on it. So I'm going to show you that bit first briefly. This has 8 CPUs, 8 gig of RAM, 400 gig of disk. That's probably okay for a very, very small site, and I'll show you the sizing in a few moments. It's got 2 network adapters. It's got a VM network for communication with the internet, and it's got a span port that I'm connecting to the network mirror port so it can receive some information, although I'm cheating a little bit on that, so I'll go into that later. Also, I've got a data store ISO file, which is the file that I downloaded from Microsoft that I've now plugged into here, and I've skipped that bit, the actual downloads, that you don't need to wait for it to download and speed this up, right? Choose connect, save that, and hopefully this will actually play and boot. There we go. We choose the language. And then we choose the size. And this is really fun. I think this is so fun because what you get to do is choose the size of machine that you're building. I don't know if it actually makes a difference. I haven't actually checked. But what I do know is that if you choose the bottom one, it doesn't work. And because I was always building in small lab environments, I spent the first days choosing the bottom one, and it doesn't work. A little bit of insight there for you. Don't choose the bottom one when you're testing. I always go a little bit higher. It always seems to work regardless. It's never run out of space in my testing. In the production rollouts I've done, we've been using machines that were way bigger than that anyway, so I've never actually got around to figuring out why it doesn't work. But don't go for the bottom one just to save yourself some time. I'm going to go with that one. And it just goes away and starts building, which is great. So it pretty much does everything it needs to until it gets to a point where it needs to ask you a question. And this is the mistake I made last time. I kind of waited for it, and that took so long. I am going to give it a second to do its thing, though, and we'll get to the next step. In the meantime, any questions?
We've got someone typing.
Ooh.
I don't know if they want to. There you go. Do you want to say that one, Graham, or shall I just read it out for you?
I can read it now. It's fine. Sorry, Matt, I have got team now.
I can. Sorry,
No,
it's double muted. Yeah. I just had a question about the patching of the OT sensor, the updating. Because earlier on you mentioned how OT devices aren't easily patched. So if you did have to update the software on here, is there any kind of failover to keep that protection in place whilst you update?
Failover on the sensor? No, there isn't. There's no high availability or that kind of thing. The patching is all kind of built in. So the operating system that we run, that I should have showed you actually, is Ubuntu. It's an Ubuntu virtual machine, and it's a hardened version of Ubuntu that is developed by CyberX and now Microsoft. And so the patching is a very slick, quick mechanism that you can push from the Azure portal, or you can push it from the sensor itself via the local console. I'll show you soon. It's relatively quick. The gap in protection is probably not going to affect anything, given that it's a silly thing to say, but the gap in protection is going to be quite small compared to the amount of I don't think it would matter, if I'm honest. I don't think it would need to fail over unless it breaks, in which case then yes, you would need to do something. But rebuilding this is pretty quick, and there's a backup mechanism to get it back up in place. I guess you could have a second sensor with the backup ready to go in if you were in a facility that was relying on this for the OT security. In a production environment, perhaps you would have some kind of failover. The reason that it typically wouldn't have a failover is that mirroring ports require a physical connection. So even in a virtual environment, you can't literally fail over to another host without having another mirror port connected to that host in the right port, so that it actually receives the information over the wire. There is the possibility of using RSPAN, remote span, and encrypted remote span to mitigate that. I mean, you don't need to have a physical cable, but we'll talk about that in a moment when this finishes building. Does that answer your question, Graham?
It does, thank you.
Cool. Okay, so you can see this takes a little while. I've built another machine, and what you get to after that's finished doing its thing, you get to this screen here. So that's the cut. Hopefully you didn't spot that. There it is. And what you can do is you choose the monitor interface. And you saw that when I built the virtual machine, I had a VM network as network 1, SPAN network as network 2. ENS 192 is the second one. And I only know that by guessing, but it is, so it's fine. And you select it, you choose OK. Then you are offered the ER SPAN monitor interface. Now, maybe you know what encrypted remote span is. I didn't, certainly, and I've been told what it is by very clever people at Ontinu. And also, I know that the sensor itself cannot receive ER-span traffic. It can just it's not a receiver of ER-span traffic. It kind of just picks it up and monitors it in the same way it does span traffic. You have to have some appliance receiving the span traffic at the other end. And anyway, it's a way of encrypting the span so that it can go over non-physical networks, over VLANs and across networks, so you don't need to have the physical cable connected. So it is possible to use this. I've never actually used it, although 2 of my customers do want to use it, so Microsoft are going to help with that. So once you've done that, we don't choose an ER span. Choose OK, and then we enter an IP, and it should be a local IP, obviously. Ideally, not one that you're currently using. That is one I'm currently using. It's not good. So then you enter the subnet mask and the gateway. It's not gateway. And the DNS server, which is fine. And then something for the host name. Obviously, in a production environment, don't just pick an IP. Speak to your network team, obviously, and choose the right host name. But you configure all this information. You choose that you're not going to run it as a proxy server, and then it goes away and does more configuring. And this configuring takes a little while, as I found out while I was in that talk. So I've done another sensor. We end up after that bit with this screen here, and it says, this is your generated login information. Now, I mentioned that you could buy a pre-configured appliance from Arrow, and they will ship the physical device to you for you to plug in the VM network, or no, the network, the production network, and your span. When you turn it on, it won't have this screen. So they will have sent you this information separately, maybe in the box, maybe in an email, but you'll have received the password for these 3 very important users. You've got CyberX host, which has access to root. You've got CyberX, which has more, I guess, it's not more responsibility or more access than support. It's just got different access because they're 2 different roles, and we have a look at the documentation at the capabilities of the roles. But depending on what you need to do, you would log in as the right user. These users are default, and you can change them once you get in. Certainly change the password once you get in. You don't want to be typing that too often. But you can also integrate it with Active Directory to have your Active Directory users, not all of them, hopefully, the users that are in a particular admin group, log into this and start configuring it. So I took a picture of that. There it is. So I'm going to move that over here, and I'm going to use that to log. Not that. I don't need that because, as I said, once you click OK, it goes away and does more configuring, which takes ages. So we're going to leave that and then go to my next sensor, and this is what you get. So once you've finished all that waiting and done all your configuration, you get to this OT sensor login page where you could start typing CyberX, and then the password. But and then the password. But I'm a Windows guy, so I'm not going to use one of those silly consoles. I've already been weirded out enough by having to press the space bar to do a select, so I'm not going to do that. We can now leave this as it is because it's doing all the stuff we need it to do, and we can head over to the web console because that's prettier. So I need to remember the IP address, which was 209. Now, in fact, I'll log in and show you what I was about to say. It's not, the connection isn't secured yet, so it has this big scary warning. Big scary warning. This is where it loads. There we go. And we get to the sign-in page. This is where you would get with the sensor that you've purchased from Arrow. You'd get to this login screen. So this is where I need to type in my CyberX password, which is this one here, which I've, in order to save time, I've put it in the clipboard. Now we'll log in. Once you sign in, I'm gonna have to wait to see what it says. I think it asks you to confirm some things. There you go. Once you sign in, you get to this bit here where you can type in an IP address, a subnet mask default gateway, and all this kind of stuff. And this really confused me when I was first setting this up over a year ago, because I just connected to it with the IP address. I'm not going to want to change it, am I? And actually, when you look at purchasing a device from the supplier, that'll come to you with an IP address that you don't want, that you have to connect to. So I did that, and this page was a godsend. I could then change the IP address nice and quickly. So that's why this page is here. We set the information, and it's normally set by the supplier, and this is where you can change it. It makes so much sense. I'm just not very clever. If we choose next, we get to the activation page where we can activate the sensor. And this is where we need to go back to the Defender for IoT, create a site, and grab the information. So I'll let this load so you can see what it says. Any more questions while we wait for this? No.
No.
Good.
All good at the moment, mate.
Okay, I'm going to leave that to activate. Head over to here. No, head over to here, and create a sensor name, something like OT sensor 100. I'll create a site, and that can be production 1, and choose that, and we get to select the size. Now, this size, you can see it's a large site with 1,000 max devices, and I've got one left. This is the licensing bit. This is how you're charged for it. So I've got one site that I'm paying a certain amount of money for. Actually, it's a trial, but I can have 1,000 devices maximum in the environment. So let's take a look at that. If I go to the Microsoft Admin Center, go to Purchase Services, and then choose search for Defender for IoT, I scroll down, you can see there is some products within the Microsoft 365 portal. And this is a small site with 250 devices per site, 100, 5,000, 1,000, 500 are the size of sites you can buy. 1,000 is £328 per month. The smallest one is 60 quid a month. So affordable, right? I mean, Copilot probably cost that when they all come out, maybe. So 100 devices for 60 £60 a month is pretty good. Compared to the original pricing when Defender for IoT came out, which they have now obviously changed, but it used to be the Azure consumption model, where it was charged per device as it's consumed. Let me just show you what that pricing was, because I can't remember off the top of my head, but it was significantly higher. And maybe there you go. That's the pricing that it used to be about a month ago, and it's not really very interesting now. But you can see $140 per month for 100 devices. It's now 60 quid a month, so it's at least it's much smaller. But when you get into the higher numbers, like 5,000 devices, that price comes down quite a lot. You can imagine 1,000 devices would be $1,400 per month for 1,000 devices, and that's simply not the case anymore, because 1,000 devices is 328. So they have significantly reduced the pricing. I think that's important to understand, that they've taken a look at what it was actually costing and amended it, which I think is really impressive. It also means that we're now paying per site rather than per device, so you get much more control of your costs, because you can choose the site size that you want to pay for, and if you go over it, then you buy the next license up and you can upgrade. But that's kind of how this works now, and you'd have multiple sites. Typically a site would be one facility of the right size. So that's the L that I was looking at here. So I'm going to choose a display name and choose it. What do I do? How do I? There we go. OT site 5, and then choose register. And when we do that, we've successfully registered it, and it's downloaded our activation file, which is a zip file. You don't need to unzip that. You just take it straight over to your sensor, choose upload, and good. Choose upload, and you choose open, and there it is. It contains instructions to link OT sensor 100 to Azure. Choose approve, choose activate, and it goes ahead and activates that. Really quite slick, in my opinion. It works very, very well. Give that a few seconds. Everything takes longer when you're doing it live and you're not recording a YouTube video, it seems. There we go. Now we get to choose a cert. You would do this in a production environment. You would create a trusted web certificate centrally or buy one and import the trusted cert so that when admins go to this portal, they don't see this non-secure thing, and it actually is secure. Obviously, you can use locally generated self-signed cert and then confirm this and turn off all the clever security stuff and choose finish. Not the best idea for a security console, but it's a lab, so it's fine. Right, so now that we're in, I have 15 minutes. Is that right, Matt? I think it's about 15 minutes. We're doing all right.
Yeah, you're fine for time.
Good. So you can see we have some information at the top here. We've got PPS, we have devices and alerts. PPS is packets per second that are being inspected live. Devices are devices that have been picked up in the environment based on the traffic, and then alerts. Nothing's happening in this environment because I've cheated with regards to the span because I haven't got a manufacturing facility to play into this sensor. So it would be incredibly boring, and it would have things like Nest cameras and stuff that isn't really going to help with my demonstration. So I'm going to cheat and play a PCAP that we recorded into this in a moment. So I'll show you that. Yeah, let's do that first, actually. So I'm going to go back to my VM and got my PCAP player. So what I'm going to do, you can see right at the bottom here, I've mounted a disk with a load of PCAPs in that we've captured. Actually, Microsoft captured these for us. It's very helpful because they're specific types of OT. So, for example, Mitsubishi may play that, and unable to pass. Good. This machine turned off actually while I was in London, so I didn't actually retest it playing. Unable to pass. Oh, that's unfortunate. Now we're in a troubleshooting session. Anyone spot the massive error that I've made in this? Is this space? Unable to pass. Isn't this fun? Bear with me a moment while I just double check.
The span port, is it?
Is it to do with the span port?
The span port.
No, I'm just playing this out of the one interface on the second interface on this machine. Let me just see what I've got written down. ANS 35. All right, let me try it without truncating it. Just do a normal TCP replay. Unable to pass. 9321. Now I might have to give up on that actually. Which let me try another one. Honeywell. Invalid interface name, ENS35. Does it change the interface name? That would be fun, wouldn't it? ENS35. Right. How do I said I'm a Windows guy. ENS 160 has nothing like 35. Well. That right? There we go. That worked. Back to Mitsubishi. Simple things, isn't it? There we go. just sending some packets. And as I say, these were collected from a production facility. And right now, all we're doing is playing these over the wire as if they were being sent live. So the sensor, as you'll see in a second, is receiving these and will have picked up some devices and some alerts based on the stuff that we're doing. In fact, I will send one more, which is the port scan one. Oops. Because that will show you what happens when a port scan takes place. So it's sent 50 packets. Typically in production environments, this won't say 1 or 5 or 10. It'll say thousands and thousands of packets per second. So obviously this is a lab. But if we go into device inventory now, you'll see nothing at all. Give that a few seconds to our devices. If we go into device inventory, you'll see we've got some devices, which is great. And the information you get based on just the packet capture, the traffic has been analyzed. You can see the IP address. If it has an IP address, you can see the protocols that were observed through that transfer, the firmware on the device, and the model of the device. So quite a lot of information, because Defender for IoT understands these protocols, the major protocols, and it can get that information from these. So it's very intelligent from that perspective. From an alert perspective, you can see 21 seconds ago there was a port scan detected, and this one is, well, it's about the fact that it received traffic, which is great. This other one is an S7 stop PLC. So if a machine is told to stop, that might be good in an environment. It might be normal. It might not be good. And so, for example, if we know that this machine here, if I go into the full details, if we know that this machine here sends stop commands to this device regularly, and that's a fine thing for it to do, then we can take some action with that. So I'm just going to scroll down and show you the information that you get. We get the source and target. So this was a HP machine which sent a HP human machine interface, so an actual console that is used for sending traffic, sending information and instructions to a programmable logic controller, and the PLC, so the machine itself, was the target of that information. The action we can take is that we can mute the alert, so we can say that actually is fine and we don't need to do that. There is also a feature called learn, where we can learn the alert so that we know that this type of action is normal in the environment. So same thing happens with port scan. I think that might give the option for learn. Yeah, so we can have the learn. I've got the zoom level set far too high to be able to scroll, but you can learn the alert, and then that means that it knows that this device will do a port scan. It might be something that device does on a regular basis and it's normal. If you click that by accident, you can unlearn it. The learning period is 6 weeks. It takes at least 6 weeks for Defender for IoT to have a full picture of the environment and to figure out what things are normal and what things are not. And during that 6-week period, you're also kind of supposed to give it some more information and give it a chance. So, for example, if your device has received DHCP addresses which change regularly, it's not going to know that. It's not going to be able to figure out that it's a DHCP address. So you can tell it your DHCP ranges. If we go into system settings, we can got the zoom level far too high for myself now. Put in the DHCP ranges, import them so that it knows which ranges are DHCP, so it can kind of be more aware that if that device look exactly the same as the different device, but the only thing that's different is the IP and it's within the DHCP range, it's probably the same device. Same with VLANs, we can specify all this information. We can give it as much information as it needs in order to do to give us some information. All of this information is being sent to the Azure portal because I linked it up to the Azure to Defender for IoT in the cloud. And if we go to the sites and sensors, you can see I've now got one cloud connected site, and there's the information. If I expand this is our OT sensor. It says no traffic is being detected because there isn't anymore. I'm not sending traffic right now. It has detected some, but right now the health is bad because it's not detecting traffic. But if we go into device inventory, you'll see that same list of devices with very much the same information. We also have some extra stuff that I think is quite cool, so that it gives you the Purdue level, which is the level of the hierarchy or the place within the network from the Purdue layer. And actually, I'll show you a picture of that, which is in the sensor. If we go into device map, and I just zoom out a little bit, you can see all these devices arranged in very, I guess the only way you can put it is higgledy-piggledy. The red ones are devices that have caused an alert. So this one here, for example, I'm going to zoom out. This one here, for example, why isn't it showing me the alert? Ah, it's over here. It shows you the alert. That's why it's red. Fine. But you can also get it to lay these out in a slightly different way. So if we choose that and then choose layout by Purdue, then we see where the enterprise devices are, where the supervisory devices are, so that the human machine interface, the console that an operator uses to control machines, is up here. And they will obviously communicate between layers because that's what they do. They talk to the machines. But you would probably not want to see one of the machines talking to the internet. That would probably be a bad thing. And if you saw that in your environment, that's very clear because it's clearly spanning the layer, the Purdue layers there, and it's something you can investigate. So that's a very important screen to see. Back over to the Azure portal, and yeah, that's pretty much all we can see from here. Obviously, you've got the alerts, and you can investigate that. And the reason that it's a good idea to have it in the Azure portal is that you can give access to Azure, to the Defender for IoT portal in Azure, to much more people, because they don't need to be local to the sensor or have connectivity via IP to that sensor. So you can give them access via Azure RBAC, and they can get access to this, which is pretty good. Finally, there is one more thing that you can do from the sensor, which you can't do from the Azure portal, which is the risk assessment. And if I choose generate report, there's only one button, you can't really go wrong. It will generate me a PDF report of the environment. And in this case, it's not going to be very interesting, to be honest, because I've only played a couple of things and it's only got one alert. But it essentially is an executive level report of the security of the OT environment. I say it's executive level because it goes through things in quite a lot of detail in a summary, then more detail, and it gets more and more granular as it goes down, and even picks up things like Windows servers being out of date or clear text passwords being sent over the wire, and that kind of thing. Because I'm doing a demo, it's timed out creating the risk assessment. So we'll give that a few moments to do that. In the meantime, trends analytics, you can create your own dashboard in order to visualize things as well, and then also do that user thing I talked about, creating more users and linking it to Active Directory by going to integrations, choose AD, link it to Azure to AD, and you've got these other integrations as well. Is that finished creating the report yet? There it is. Download that, open that, and you get a security score. You get a nice summary at the top of things that have happened. And then if you scroll down, it gives you a good idea of the types of device in the environment that you can give to whoever needs to see this information without having to trawl through the portal. I think it's a very good idea. And we've used this to show the benefit of Defender for IoT to our customers that have started using Defender for IoT. Okay, I think that might be all I've got time to show you, given that I've got a minute or two left. Any questions before I finish?
No, nothing. That was really interesting. Thanks, Dean.
Good. Thank you for listening. Hello, John.
He's home.
Yeah,
I'm back. I've literally just walked through the door. There we go. I've been listening to that all the way back.
very good.
You figured it out, Dean.
I did eventually. I did. It took it took a trip to Israel and a trip to Germany, but I got it eventually. Got it.
No,
I don't think I don't think Microsoft. I don't think that's the learning journey for everyone who needs to try this product. The docs page is very, very good, but that's my own journey.
You could, before Alan jumps in, I'm going to preempt his question. But Dean, licensing. How do we license this product?
Well, you obviously weren't listening because I definitely did.
He
cover
did mention
licensing.
it. Yeah.
No, I know you did.
I almost cheered.
Yeah.
That's a hell of a difference between the old pricing and new pricing, though.
It was. Which it was too expensive for large sites. You know, for 1,000 devices, 1,400 a month, and production sites have hundreds of thousands of devices typically that they want to monitor. So yeah, it wasn't really good. But yeah, it's a pretty good solution. The only thing I missed was that it's an NDR, so a network detection and response platform, but the response kind of isn't there because you can't typically respond in an OT environment. If you try to respond by doing something, the people running the OT would probably be upset, because if you've turned off their machine because it looked like it was being hacked and they stopped production of a massive part that they were, you can't really do response in the traditional way.
I suppose that's where the ServiceNow integration comes in. There's that point, people like that, where you're effectively producing ticketing systems rather than like a proactive response.
Yeah, it's all about communication, really, getting the information to the right person at the right time, and that's what we with Ontinu, that's what we build as well, alongside implementing the sensor. We build our service around that and make sure we know who to contact in the event of any kind of alert that is, you know, bound to be a true positive.
Yeah, interesting.
I thought so.
Good stuff. No, it was good. Really good. From what I was obviously drifting in and out. I did hear you mention licensing, but how much was it? Did you say how much was it for?
Well, it used to be per device. It used to be really expensive. So for 1,000 devices, it was £1,400 pounds a month. But now it's significantly cheaper, and it's like 300 quid for 1,000 devices a month.
No, very cool. I'd be interested to see if there is. I mean, I would assume that you can bring those alerts out into Sentinel, and kind of for that automation somehow. Be cool.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, so Sentinel is where they go. Really, they go into the portal, but we always put them to Sentinel. The Ontinu service is based on Microsoft Sentinel, so we use that to do all of our detection. It's based on Sentinel, so yes, you would put them in Sentinel. Or obviously any other scene, but Sentinel is the obvious choice.
Yeah, no, cool. Thank you, Mr. Ellerby. Really appreciate that.
Thank you.
And got back in time just for the end of it. So
just in time for the quiz.
Just in time for the quiz, which is always a good bit of fun. Yeah, should we just go straight in, Matt?
It's launched, yeah. Everyone should be able to see that one. I guess we will do top one tonight.
Top one. Sounds good to me.
Make that full screen.
Tasty.
Nice. Excellent. Everyone's hungry.
That's what I had earlier from the services.
Nice.
The triple bacon, it was too much. I couldn't finish it. It was a ridiculous amount of meat. IoT. Anyone else joining? Anybody else can't join? Anybody else having problems? How many we got? What's that?
5 at the moment.
9. Should be a couple more. I think this is all going to be incognito. Yeah, Thomas is getting in slowly. Cool.
Good chances tonight then. Should we just
I think Thomas, yeah, Thomas. That's the problem. See, everybody's got a code name now on this one, apart from Stephen Graham. How you getting on, Thomas? There. Oh,
yeah.
Let's see. I think he's don't know if that's Thomas now or not, do we?
Shall we go?
All good to go. Countdown, Matt. Got to do a countdown.
3, 2, 1.
Yes, go for it.
What's the new name for Azure Active Directory? It's Entra ID. Well done. Most of you knew that one. Microsoft DevBox went GA recently. How much RAM does the largest box have? Oh, sorry, Thomas. We'll try next time. It's 128 gig. Oh, that's thinned out the herd a little bit. In which Azure region is Nutanix NC2 not supported? Now, this is where you're paying attention in the first beat.
I was drifting in and out of signal.
That's a likely excuse.
I'm going to go that one.
Correct answer is North Europe. It's coming now, apparently. According to StatCounter, what percentage of global desktop machines are running Linux now?
Oh, that's a good one.
Yeah, it's 3%. It's about something like 75, 80% of machines in Azure, I think, are now Linux machines. How much do you pay for IoT agentless monitor for 1,000 devices for the first 30 days? Correct answer was $0. Yeah, well done. So you had to get something that was tangential to licensing for you. What's the name of the Twitter clone from Meta? And all I want to do now is set up one called Strings.
Interesting announcement today from Inspire with Meta and Microsoft.
Well, collaboration on their OpenAI model, yeah. Come on then, what does IoT stand for? Should be isobotonic. There you go, we're rattling through these now. Which of the following is not a Microsoft Defender for? Everyone gets that one right. Oh, it's going to be on times on this one. According to IoT Analytics, how many IoT devices are there expected to be by the end of this year? 19.8 billion IoT devices, apparently. What's the name of the Microsoft app platform for IoT devices? Answer Sphere. Mariner is the Linux flavor that they've done for containers. And our winner is McTasty. Who was McTasty?
Who was McTasty?
That was me, Joe.
Oh, well done, Alan.
Mr. Florence, well done.
Mariners
No
not
problem.
Linux anymore as well. It's Azure Linux now.
Has it been rebranded again?
It's rebranded to Azure Linux.
Is it Wednesday? Have we renamed something?
Oh, I think that was a few weeks ago.
Defender for Azure Linux.
And aside, if anybody wants, Threads it's got some very funny things with it. But also be aware that if you create a Threads account, you cannot delete it unless you remove your Instagram account if you've got one.
Yeah, I saw that. That was a bit nasty, wasn't it?
Yeah.
So well done, Alan.
Well,
over to
there
you,
we go,
John.
Alan. No, thanks, Matt. No, absolutely brilliant. Let me. Oh, there we go. I was going to say, let me do that, but yeah. So look, yeah, started off on the road. Just got home now. So look, thanks everybody for joining as usual. Congrats to Alan. I'll get your voucher over to you ASAP now over the next day or so to get that one sorted. Huge shout out to our speakers. Darren and Pete joined us a little bit earlier, talking about Nutanix and what that looked like, Nutanix on Azure. So if you are a Nutanix customer at the moment, well worth the look to see how you can kind of extend that cluster environment over onto bare metal in Azure. So all pretty good. I think I just made up a word there as well. But and look, Dean, huge thanks for that. I know, yeah, like you said, we kind of looked at that Defender for IoT a long while ago. So really cool to see you kind of work your way through to the end and kind of, I love the way you explain things, Dean. You kind of broke it down really, really well. So thanks for all the efforts going into that. I know you said that you had to cut that down with all the config there on the sensor, but it's really cool to see that, kind of hands-on. It kind of helps you understand how these things come together. So really appreciate that. Thank you, Dean. Yeah, so that kind of brings us to the end of this show. Thanks everybody again for joining. If you can give us some feedback, scan the QR code and please do. We're going to be a little bit later in August due to holidays, and I'm sure we'll all probably be on holiday at some point anyway throughout August. So 30th of August, please do stick the date in your diaries. We'll get the lineup announced over the next few days. But for now, thank you,
John,
everybody.
Before you go,
yeah, go on, Alan.
Is that 30th of August a good idea? Because isn't that the week that tons of people will be away?
Yeah, probably. I think yeah, there's a lot of holidays. I think generally over that period of time.
No, but because it's right next to the bank holidays, people take that week off with kids and things because they get a free day.
Yeah, we'll have it. I think we'll probably stick with it, to be honest. And we got this.
Oh, that's fine.
Yeah. I think, yeah, and the other thing as well for the group, and I don't know how many people on this call are from in and around the local area of South Wales, but we say it all the time, we're still trying to get back to that in person, but try and keep it hybrid. But yeah, lots going on anyway. But for now, that's where we are. Yeah, cool. We'll call it there then. We've all got
McDonald's go purchase.
McDonald's start going down on, but no, thank you all. We'll catch you all in just over a month's time then.
Thanks all.
Thanks everyone.
Okay,
thanks everyone. See you soon.
Bye.
Bye.
Is it still